Sundar Pichai said that hardware is hard.
So today I have with me Raja Manickam. Welcome, Raja, to the podcast.
Thank you.
Raja, you have built two great companies in semiconductor space, and you are the very few entrepreneurs that have put India on the map for hardware.
The software guys are daylight robbers, right? The highway has been built by these, hardware people, and they just take advantage of it. So Microsoft is trying to build their own chip.
Microsoft becomes the latest big company to start making its own chips.
Amazon is trying to build their own chip.
Amazon, now it's looking to conquer the chips.
Even Tesla. But remember, they're not chip companies. They're system companies. They're solutions companies, right? But then they don't actually build the chip themselves. They outsource it. So this is, a good point for India. We don't need to be a chip company. We want to actually be a solutions company.
What makes semiconductor hot again now? Why will semiconductor industry compete for the best talent along with software industry? Let's get back to the history of Nvidia, like Jensen Huang. What suddenly changed? Like why it became one of the most valuable companies in the world?
The reason why Nvidia is successful is because they actually...
My question to you is, where does India has an advantage in this new semiconductor and AI race?
So,
Hi, this is Siddharth Aluwalia, your host today at Neon Show and co-founder of Neon Fund, a fund that invests in the most promising enterprise AI software solutions coming out of India and built for the globe. Today, we'll discuss about the history of semiconductors in India and what really is all the gung-ho-ness in the government about building semiconductors in India, competing with the world. So today I have with me Raja Manickam. Welcome, Raja, to the podcast.
Thank you.
Raja, you have built two great companies in semiconductor space. The one you are representing right now, IVP Semiconductors, and the previous one, Tizol, that was acquired by the Hero Group. So big congratulations on your success.
Thank you.
And you are the very few entrepreneurs that have made hardware in India, succeeded in it, put India on the map for hardware.
Thank you. Thank you.
So what I want to discuss is, because our audience, some of them might not know about semiconductors. So let's discuss about the history globally of semiconductors, and then we'll come to the history of semiconductors in India.
Sure. Even I think Sundar Pichai said that hardware is hard. Okay, so it's very unique in that sense, right? It is hard because it involves a lot of multiple players that you'll have to interact with versus, if you're software, right? You can create your own software package, and then the engagements that you'll need to have within the ecosystem players, right, in multiple locations, geographies, make it very difficult. So just to let you give you a little bit of a history of semiconductors, and my own journey. So I started at Texas Instruments as a test engineer after my graduation.
In which year?
1982. I'm from IIT Kharagpur, ECE. In those days, the moment you graduate, you look for going outside of the country. There's not too many opportunities here. So fortunately for me, one thing that happened was I actually started working in a factory. Right? Most people, end up going into a design or something like that. So I had a lot of practical exposure, right? And then later on, with Texas Instruments, and I went to Fairchild. Fairchild, as you know,
all in India or in the US?
No. I was in Singapore, and then I was in the US.
Okay.
Right. So most of my career was in the US.
Okay.
I was in the East Coast with Fairchild. Fairchild, as you know, is the mother of semiconductors, right? And then I went to the West Coast in Silicon Valley.
Okay.
Right. And Fairchild became National Semiconductor.
In 82, you moved out of India to Singapore?
Yes.
And then which year you moved to the US?
88.
You moved to Fairchild.
To Boston, Fairchild,
Boston.
Portland, Maine, actually.
Yeah.
And then I was there for a few years. And during that time, I was also sent to Malaysia to run the factory, Fairchild factory. I was running the engineering department for them. And then I came back again to the US. Then I was based in Silicon Valley.
And which company? Fairchild?
Fairchild got acquired when I was there, acquired by National Semiconductor. Sure. So I became, part of National Semiconductor. And during that time, it was actually pretty good. I ran the telecom business unit. So I got into the business side of things. And at that time, I had the fortune of coming to India was liberalizing telecom and all that in the mid 90s. So we had a lot of chips that we were trying to sell. So I actually came to India to work with some of the CDOT engineers in Delhi and Bangalore.
Yeah.
Very young engineers, and so I used to work with them. So that was also a good experience for me. And then I was back in Silicon Valley. I was in few startups there, but nothing became big. So then I started my own company in 2004.
In the valley or in India?
2003, I started TESOLVE in the US. In 2004, really, took off in India, and really it was an India-based company. I wanted to do manufacturing. Believe it or not, in 2004, I had all these manufacturing plans that are being funded by the government today. We had that plan in 2004, but the country was not ready, right, at that time. So I ended up, doing engineering services, which was TESOLVE. Very, very successful. We created probably more than 10,000 engineers that have gone through our system.
Okay.
And they're all over the world. I'm very proud to say that you will find a TESOLVE engineer in almost every chip company in the world.
Okay.
And then after I sold it to the Hero Group, I was running it for a while, for 4 or 5 years. And then I joined the Tata Group, and Tata wanted to get into semiconductor.
Okay.
I was there for a couple of years. And then I said, hey, time to build a chip company out of India, right? We have a lot of chip designers, but we don't have a chip company. And I kind of figured out why and so forth. And I believe that the timing was good.
Sure.
That's how IVP was born.
And which year IVP was born?
Last year.
Okay.
2024.
So this is your history as an entrepreneur. Let's discuss about the history of semiconductors.
Okay. So semiconductor, originated like, Fairchild and, TI, and then the Fairchild guys, created Intel, and, so kind of mushroomed out, right? So semiconductor was a very innovative, the transistor was the basis for it, right? Where you could make smaller and smaller transistors. And that is how, the industry flourished. And semiconductor was very vertically integrated. So when I was in TI, we had a design, we had our design tools, we had made, our own design tools. We had our own factories. We had our own fabs and back-end packaging. We had, even making equipment for this, were all done vertically integrated. Yeah. So if you didn't have all of these things, you could not be a semiconductor company, right? So it was, very few people were involved because, you needed all of this to make a chip, right? Now, TI was the first company that set up shop in India, believe it or not, to make design software tools. And the reason was also because the CTO of TI at that time, I'm talking about the mid-80s, was an Indian guy. And he was going towards, to his retirement, and he said, I need to go start. But anyway, so that's how TI started. TI was the first company set up in Bangalore to do, so fortunately for me, my first job was TI.
Okay.
Right? So I learned a lot from TI on, how they were doing this. So,
and semiconductor means chips, or what does semiconductor mean?
Yeah. So semiconductor, by the name, right? When you say conductor, right? Conductor is like
conducts electricity.
Conduct electricity, right? So if you put a copper wire or a aluminum wire or something, right? So you can send electricity to one. So semi is where you can control it,
okay,
right? So you dope a certain material, and then you can control how much, and when you want to switch and when you want to switch it off, right? So a controlled, that's what a transistor is, yeah, right? It's a transistor you can switch on and off and bias it, right? So as you want it. So I think that's the difference, right? So that's why it's called semiconductor. And it's a lot of, the process uses silicon as a base. But there's a lot of doping of different chemicals and so on.
And that's why Silicon Valley is called Silicon Valley, because there the semiconductors originated.
Correct. Yeah. So that's where the name silicon comes, right? Because the base material is silicon. So, but I think what happened was in the 80s and probably the 90s is where the pieces broke out, right? So you could, like for example, TI sold the equipment group out. So they started companies which were just doing equipments, right? And then, actually the TI guy, Morris Chang, is the one who started TSMC, right? He also was a fab manager in TI. And he went off to Taiwan to start TSMC, which is, everybody knows TSMC is the world's largest foundry for wafers, right?
Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company.
Yeah. It was started by, the TI guy, right? And so, so pieces of it became available. So now, I think probably in the early 90s and mid 90s, so chip startups started coming because now they could go and outsource, they could get the fab done somewhere. They could do the packaging. There was companies like ASE and Amcor. So the entire food chain, right, of semiconductor, which was vertically integrated, became more horizontal.
And what's the difference between a chip and a semiconductor?
Oh, I mean, chip is a semiconductor, right? I mean, it's
all the Nvidia chips that we talk about today are all semiconductors.
Yes.
So today, essentially, in the AI world, Nvidia has a lead in all the semiconductor chips that can facilitate high compute on a single chip.
That's correct. So there's something called Moore's Law, right? You may have heard of Moore's Law, which
founder of Intel,
which said that you could double your capacity in terms of every year or every second year or something, right? So you've exponentially you could pack more and more transistors. So the more transistors you pack, the more computing you can do, right? And that's where you talk about and the way you pack more is you reduce the process nodes, right? So now people are talking about 2 nanometer, 3 nanometer. So when I first started, it was in not nanometer, it was in microns, right? So thousands of nanometers. Now you're talking about 3 nanometer, 2 nanometer. So the transistor sizes have become smaller and smaller, so you can pack more, right? The more you can pack, the more computing power you can do. So I think so this evolved, right? So now there's a specialization in everything, right? So there are equipment specialists, right? And within that, right, they have lithography has like ASML you may have heard of. And they got applied materials. And then you have, fabs, TSMC, UMC and all that, just doing the wafer fab. And then you got the back-end packaging.
What is fab?
So wafer fab, so once you do the design, right? Now you actually make the chip. So this chip making is actually done in the wafer fab.
Yeah.
Right?
Fabrication is the short form for fab, right?
Wafer fabrication.
Yeah.
Yes. So wafer is, you start with the silicon base, right? We call it like a pizza, right? It's either an 8-inch or 12-inch pizza, right? And then you build structures on top of it. You basically build a lot of transistors on top of it, connected with metal layers, right? And the more you, like a Nvidia chip goes through, huge amount of processing, right? They keep building on top of it, 200, 300 steps they have to go through. One wafer will have to go through before they come out. And that's why, it's very expensive as well, right? Both because the equipment that you need for the Nvidia kind of a chip is very, very expensive.
Yeah.
And the yields and all that. And then you have like analog chips like TI and all that does, right? Which has been around for since I started in my career. So, which you do not need, extensive processing. So one of my goals, for India was, let's start with that kind of analog and power and all that. So IVP is a power semiconductor company.
And your first company, Dissolve, was a services company. You worked for other companies.
Previously.
Yeah.
So Dissolve it provides services for Intel, AMD, TI. So we were doing they would outsource some design or they'll outsource testing, which they were doing internally. They would just outsource it to us, right? So Qualcomm was one of the big customers that we had.
One thing which I want to ask is, semiconductors was, since Intel was at its peak in 80s and 90s. Semiconductor was at its peak, right? But since 95, when Microsoft became big, then since 95 till, let's say, 2023, it was all ruled by software and internet and mobile. And now semiconductors have become mainstream again. Why is that?
Yeah, that is a very good question, right? See, it's like the highway, right? Once you build a highway,
Yeah.
there's a lot of things that happens around the highway.
Yeah, you're right. Once you build a highway, then there's an ambassador car, but people are not satisfied with the ambassador car. They want to build newer designs. They want to build Ferraris. They want to build.
So when you have a highway,
Yeah.
right, a lot of economy comes around it.
Yeah.
Right. Factories come, next to highways. Homes comes, and connectivity increases and all that. But nobody bothers about who built the highway, what technology went into the highway, right? So our story is that, right? We are the highway, right? The hardware guys are the highway. So, there is not so much recognition on the highway itself, right? So I always think that, the software guys are daylight robbers, right? So the highway has been built by this, hardware people, and they just take advantage of it, right? So they build, applications on top of it. So as a consumer, you see the applications, right?
Yeah.
You don't see the, what goes on inside, right? Even if you look at your Apple iPhone and so on, right? There's so much of technology that goes into the hardware, right? So I think, that was the story.
I think, and Apple is able to capture that value because it does it end to end, right? If Apple was only selling the phone and no applications on top of it, it wouldn't have had the current market share it has today.
Yeah. So actually, so what has happened is Apple is a very classic case where actually they build, the computers, right? You remember the Macintosh and all that, right? And then they went to the, iPod and then, the iPhone and all that, right? So they actually build the hardware and then they build the, the applications that are like iTunes and stuff like that, right? So it's a very good case of the hardware driving the business, right? But it is an exception, right? Like you said, right, Microsoft and all that, they were just riding on other people's, hardware, right? Now, what has changed is the Apple model. Now, Apple actually makes their own microprocessor.
Okay, wow.
Right? Yeah. So they bought a microprocessor company. Now they have their own microprocessor, right?
These are called M1 and M2 chips, right?
Yes. Yeah. There was a company called PA Semi, which was a microprocessor startup, and they bought it. And then now they make that M1, M3. So the microprocessor is very tuned to the Apple application, right? So that's why, you get the best power, best performance and all that. Now, this is catching on, right? So Microsoft is trying to build their own chip. Amazon is trying to build their own chip, right? Because, all their data centers and all that, right? They want to have their own computing so that even Tesla, for example, right? One of the big success story for Tesla is, they have their own processor.
So in all Tesla cars, the entire compute, the hardware that powers the compute is their own?
It used to be Nvidia.
Okay.
Then now, they slowly, there may be some still Nvidia chips, but a lot of them are their own technology, right? But remember, Tesla or Microsoft or Amazon or Meta, they're not chip companies, right? They're system companies. They're software companies, system companies, right? They're solutions companies, right? So they are now getting into the, they have some IPs, like Google, right? They have their own IP for a chip. But then they don't actually build the chip themselves. They outsource it, right? And this is a huge opportunity now.
And in most cases, the outsourcing partners TSMC.
Yes. If you want to go into the highest node possible, you have to, TSMC is the only game in town.
Yeah.
Right? It's very hard to reach. But my point is this, right? I believe now we are going one full circle, right? So all that outsourcing, has happened, right? Now, they're trying to become vertically integrated again, right? So these system companies want to make their own chips, right? It was like TI, right?
Yeah.
So TI made the calculator chips. You must have heard of the TI calculator, right? So because they made the chip, they could make a calculator, right? Now, and then, all these outsource happened. Then TI became just pure chip company.
Yeah.
Right. So this is, a good point for India, right? Now we are in 2025.
Yeah.
We don't need to be a chip company, right? We want to actually be a solutions company.
Yeah.
Right. So IVP is one of that, right? So
And what solution do you offer?
So in the power market, right, power segment, we have all the the typical the chips that you need to in order to build a power module, right? So coming to power, I think this is very important topic. See, I believe in electrification, right? When you talk about decarbonization and so on, right? If you electrify everything, right, that is a path to decarbonization and so on, right? So that's what is happening in the EV market, and this, and then you also have distributed power generation possibilities with solar and wind and all that, right? You don't need to have this massive, coal-based or thermal, hydro-based plants anymore, right? You can do distributed, So both of this phenomena is a very recent phenomenon, last 10, 15 years, right? So I think, once you do the electrification, then you have a good chance of reducing, pollution and, like electric cars have less pollution, right? And so on. So IVP is, in a way, it's an electrification enabler. So the chips that we are going to produce is to create this, to enable electrification in a big way, right? So we are focused on, how do you build chips to enable electrification? The other thing is, see, if you look at an aircon, for example, right, air conditioner, this is warming up in every year and all that, right? Even Bangalore is becoming very warm, right? The more you use air conditioner, you actually, you're putting out a lot of heat as well, right? So that may not be the right solution, right? It's okay, where, maybe 20 years, 30 years ago, right? So now you have a lot of opportunities and technologies available where you could use electronics, you could use these chips now to actually reduce the power consumption by significant amount, like less than half. We already have, companies in, actually Chennai is a professor, he's from IIT Madras, 67 batch, right? So he's still going strong. Who is, creating these kind of products. So I think there's a whole slew of products that are going to come in the next 10, 20 years, which will look a lot different from what we are used to, right? Whether it's a noise pollution or, the amount of electricity used per gadget, right? So I think these are all new opportunities for India, which is now getting into the semiconductor game.
But I'm still inconclusive about what makes semiconductor hot again now, right? Why will semiconductor industry compete for the best talent along with software industry?
Yeah.
Why will, let's say, IITians, which till now chose 50% of the batch used to go in software, even if they are coming from mechanical, why will they choose semiconductor in the next 20 years or starting from now?
I think this, Siddharth, this is a very good point. When I was, when I graduated, right, I'm talking about 1982, a lot of guys from mechanical, naval architecture, we had a group called naval architecture. They all went into software because there was a digitizing effort that was going on, right? So everything was getting digitized. So there's a lot of opportunities in software. A lot of my batchmates ended up in Microsoft, right? Even though they were, ECE guys, right? At that time, we didn't have computer science, by the way. It came in 85.
Yeah.
So I think, one of the big things that is happening is they have found out that tuning the hardware to the software makes a huge difference, right? That is why you see, right, Microsoft. So Apple is a very classic case, right? The performance of the Apple iPhone depends on the hardware, right? So if you own that piece and if you're able to tune, right, you actually will have a better system, right? So even the air conditioning I talked to you about, right? If an air conditioner maker, right, is able to understand on the hardware piece of it, so there's a lot of work that is going on that helps in this. Now the other thing also, whenever you talk about chips, right, you always talk about computing power,
Yeah.
right? But what has happened in the last 20 or 25 years is you must have heard of MEMS, sensors, which are now made in the semiconductor, using semiconductor process, right? So MEMS, right, electromechanical stuff, right? Now you can make a tiny motor, right? So, the number of sensors and MEMS you have in your cell phone is significant amount, right? That is how you track your movement and, all kind of things that goes on, right? The number of MEMS in this is, huge. Now, all these things were not available before,
Yeah.
right? Now, semiconductor is able to integrate a lot of these things together, right? So it's not just computing anymore, right? So you have sensors, you have measurements, you have all kind of things that you can now build in a semiconductor process.
Just to summarize, you are saying the amount of new applications that can be developed or new experiences using technology that can be developed, hardware is going to empower these experiences and technology.
Absolutely, you're right.
And there will be so much customization in hardware. Like last 30 years of software was because there was so much customization in software, right?
Yes.
If you don't like X, you could buy Y and you can customize Y to Z. Now you're saying hardware was very rigid. Like you had a chip and you had to do it on same thing on the chip you got. Let's say there was no difference between a Dell laptop and an IBM laptop because they all had the same underlying motherboard, right? Which was a semiconductor. And now what you're trying to say is every maker will have their own customized motherboard, and within that, the amount of customizations can be done can give rise to thousands of new applications.
Yes, you can now differentiate your products based on the application, and it is not too expensive to do that now, right? So, the chips that was made like 40, 50 years ago, right? And they're very, very rigid, like
Sure.
you said, right? They give you a chip and then they say, okay, you go figure out, what you can do with it. Now it's the other way, right? So you take a lot of the software and you actually make a chip out of it, right? So
How do you make a chip out of software?
No, you see, because let's say your software requires a lot of computing, right? I mean, Nvidia is a very classic case, right? The reason why Nvidia is successful is because they actually had this software, AI software, they call it CUDA, right? So now they had that hardware that runs this CUDA very, very efficiently. Right. So because most of AI engine is now actually runs off CUDA.
So let's get back to the history of Nvidia. Like Jensen Huang, right, who's the founder of it. It was an unknown company till 2016-17, making gaming hardware. Let's say if you buy a laptop, there will be a small chip if it's a gaming laptop powered by Nvidia. But what suddenly changed? Like why it became one of the most valuable companies in the world suddenly?
See, this is what you call luck. Okay. He actually, Nvidia was a graphics, like you said, right, for gaming and a large amount of computing. It was a graphics chip company, right? Intel also had a graphics chips company, but they were more focused on the microprocessor and so on, right? AMD is also, had graphics, but they again, they were more on the processing versus, the graphics. So graphics is a pure computing, thing. So you had a microprocessor and then you had just pure computing for this kind of applications. AI came in, right, which requires a lot of computing. So AI basically saved Nvidia, right? In fact, Jensen would say that, right? He was at the right place, right time, right? If AI was not there, Nvidia would not have been, able to survive in the long term, right? But I think this is where, the AI saved Nvidia. And then they had a head start because there was no company which had that kind of graphics chips. And he had also had, I don't know whether it's intuition or, he was very smart that he had the software to do that, which was the CUDA.
What does CUDA do?
So CUDA is basically enables very fast AI computing, right? So any chip, right? You need to figure out how you compute that, right?
Yeah.
So which steps to go to get the best result quickly, right? So he had these algorithms which did that. Just like if you look at the Microsoft example, right? You can't run away from Microsoft operating system,
Yeah.
right? No matter who makes the software, whether Dell or whoever it is, you still have to use Microsoft, right? Microsoft Office or something like that. So this is what it is. CUDA is for AI. So everybody has to now depend on that. Now he had a head start, right? Because they are the ones who owned CUDA, so they could make the chips for efficiently to do that.
But I'm still not able to understand what CUDA does for an end user like me.
So no, actually it is internally, right? There is a software. There's multiple stacks,
Yeah.
right? So where you see is on the application, on the
Yeah.
top, right? But the internally, how efficiently it runs, right? So it's more in the deeper layers.
So, for example, you're saying Chat GPT today by OpenAI is powered by CUDA.
At some level, inside will be, at the chip level, there will be some form of CUDA will be running.
And let's say tomorrow somebody produces another Nvidia like chip and they don't have CUDA. What difference does it make?
So they will have to, build all that, software, compilers, and all those kind of
So
things.
this is the software that interacts with the end application layer and the chip. That's what you're saying.
It's mostly, on the chip side of things. It's on the deeper, inside. But yeah, of course, right? The next layer it will have some interface. You could think about something like if you look at a microprocessor, right? So microprocessor, same thing, right? So you have a lot of software that runs on the chip. Right? The application sits on top of it,
Yeah.
right? So now, if you are the guy who's going to be defining what the chip is going to do, right? Or at that firmware level, you have an advantage.
Why is nobody able to compete with Nvidia?
No, I think they are now, right? As I said, right? They were the first in the, so they have a head start. If you look at that, even on the chip side, they're struggling, right? Because, at some point Intel or AMD or all these guys will start to give them some competition.
Yeah.
And then, like people like Microsoft, right? Because they come from the application side. They're now starting to make their own chip.
Yeah. My thing that I wonder is, why did Intel and AMD get left behind in the AI race as compared to Nvidia?
I think, see, again, same thing, when you are in the microprocessor business, which was doing really well for Intel, right?
All three were doing microprocessor, right? Intel, AMD, and
not
Nvidia.
so much Nvidia. Nvidia was on the graphics.
Okay, so they were building graphic chips, and Intel and AMD were building only micro.
They had some graphics, but Nvidia was a graphics only chip,
Okay.
right? So, if you look at it from a business perspective, right? Intel was focused on the microprocessors, the x86 thing, right?
The one we call RAM in the computer, right?
Well, the x86, right? You heard of x86, or nowadays you talk about ARM, right? And then you talk about RISC-V, right? So they're all like different ways of
The hardware
running.
compute power.
Yes, yeah. So the graphics is is a specialized thing you can say, and it was only in the gaming market, right? And gaming market is a small market. But once AI came into play, right? These guys did not expect that to take off so quickly.
And why was AI not able to run on microprocessor, and why only specialized NVIDIA chips?
No, I think, see, you will still have a microprocessor. They are processing a lot of it, but a lot of the heavy load of computing, they just throw it into the graphics chips,
Okay.
right? So, it's a lot more nuanced. See, because, the chip size matters, right? How big the chip is, right? To do so, you need to optimize that, right? So, Nvidia being a chip company, they did pretty good on it. But even lately, right, you see they have yield issues, they're not able to deliver enough, right? But because they're only game in town, they can charge $20,000, $30,000 per module.
Who is NVIDIA's largest customers? Then?
There'll be all these guys, who are playing, supplying to data centers, where there's a huge amount of computing, right? So all these guys, there's the guys who are building all these servers, right? Supermicro and all that, but they're like in between guys, right? So ultimately, it will go into data centers and government.
So you're saying ultimately Microsoft, Google, and Amazon are the largest consumers of Nvidia. And I heard like the large
AWS.
like CEOs of these companies, for example, Mark Benioff from Salesforce, he was having dinner with Jensen Huang and trying to convince him to give him some more, trying to buy some more
Correct.
chips for AI.
Yeah.
Like everybody's trying to boo him.
Yeah, because like Salesforce, right? They want to do a lot of computing to for the AI learning and
But
all
most
that.
of their computing is done on the cloud. I don't know what's the relation between their hardware and.
No, because cloud ultimately has hardware sitting there, right? So that hardware is Nvidia's hardware.
Okay.
Right. Broadcom is also getting into it, by the way.
Okay. And do you think anytime Nvidia's lead will get shattered because now everybody would have this technology?
I always believe that you can't hold like 90% market share in anything.
Yeah.
Right. So eventually, yes, I know how quickly it is, anybody's guess.
And tides change very soon. Like for example, IBM was the Nvidia of 1980s, only like having 90% share in the computer market. And then everybody had the computer technology, so it got democratized.
Yes.
And then essentially IBM had to pivot to being a services company.
Exactly. See, we imagine if IBM was a leader, right? They had phenomenal wafer fabs and so forth.
I think IBM was like the desirable company to work for in your time when your batch graduated.
Whether you won't believe this story, I had job offers from TI, Fairchild, and I'd interviewed with IBM.
Okay.
I was waiting for IBM's response,
Okay.
right? And finally, I called IBM. I told them this. I said, look, I want to take the job, but I really want IBM. Then IBM did not give me the job. I did not get the job in IBM. Then I chose TI. So you're right. So IBM was the most sought out at those days.
Yeah, was the Google of those days.
Yes. So I mean, even if you look at Google, right? Who would have thought that somebody would challenge Google,
Yeah.
right? But now, because with AI and all that is becoming, they will, right? So I'm sure that Nvidia will have something, and the whole market is growing. So I don't think you can keep buying $20,000-$30,000 chips anymore. Right?
Where do you think India has an advantage? Like India definitely had an advantage in terms of IT services, because when Narayan Murthy scaled Infosys, like what happened was 1991 liberalization, and $1 suddenly costed like 20 rupees or 40 rupees. And now when Narayan Murthy was earning in dollars, he was paying in rupees, and he could train all the fresh talent coming out of colleges in Java, in C++, or any computer language for that matter. And India had a huge unemployment problem in the 1990s. So he said, why not train millions of people in software, and I'll make sure that I'll get enough work for them. And that's how Infosys, TCS, Wipro became the leader in IT services.
Yes.
So my question to you is, where does India has an advantage in this new semiconductor and AI race?
Yeah. So I have a slogan, right? And say, there is an Indian every chip. There is an Indian in every chip, right? And the reason why I say that is we touch every aspect of making a chip, right? Software, what we call EDA tools, which are used for designing a chip.
But Indians are not manufacturing it.
Yeah. So I'll tell you, right? So there is an Indian, who would have been in the design aspect of it, or the tools for the design, would have been in the software piece of it that goes into the chip, because the chip doesn't work by itself, right? You have to have firmware and operating system and all that. So that's why I said there is an Indian in every chip, except, right, the manufacturing piece was missing.
Yeah.
Right. So by and large, right, we've already, are there in the semiconductor, right? So if you look at other countries, right, the size of, one is, the size, right? other than China, right? You take Taiwan or Korea or Malaysia or Singapore, all these countries, right, where a lot of the manufacturing is happening. They just don't have the size, right?
The manpower.
The manpower, right, that is required. That's one. Second thing is the depth of talent, right? Think about Taiwan, right? How many, graduates they can come out in a year, right?
I don't know.
It will be like Bangalore will have more than,
Okay.
right? The entire Taiwan put together, right? Or Chennai, for example, right? They have so many engineering colleges and all that. So I think, one is, and also the depth of, if you look at all these countries, right? Malaysia, Thailand, Philippines, and Singapore and all that, they have a lot of manufacturing, and not so much on the fab, but on the back end, we call packaging and so on. But the depth of, engineering requirements, right, are still not there, right? So they do, they can do manufacturing, but not what I call engineering intensive manufacturing. And also the other phenomenon that's happening is this customization is driving a lot more engineering activity, right? So it's not that, you build, a system like today, right? You can pick a car and you can pick the features in the car that you want, right? Right? My father-in-law, had always had an ambassador car, right? There's no feature other than the grill in the front, right? You can't, pick any feature, right? So think about it, right? So there's so much customization that goes on, which is basically engineering, right? So a lot of that activity also happens in India. We are so, set up for doing that, right? And we also have like what I call frugal engineering, right? Culturally, we know how to, work and bring this out. So it's a huge advantage. And semiconductor is a technology that the globe requires, whether you're talking about ESG or global warming or whatever it is, right? You require semiconductor or technology has a solution. And semiconductor is a foundation for that, right? Now, the solutions that have come so far, in my opinion, right, is just scratching the surface, and the most benefit has gone towards the affluent people, the Western countries and affluent, right? It has not touched the 80%, which are the normal, lower, which is what is required, right? Whether you're talking about, clean energy or, clean water and all those kind of things, technology has a solution. So I think in the next 10, 20 years, right, you will see solutions for the masses. And that solution needs to be a frugal solution, right? Western country, you could buy something, aircon for, say $1,000 or so, right? Now we need to have, cooling available for $50 or so, right? So how do you create those kind of things, right? So I think there's going to be a lot more of this. The products that are going to come out of India are going to address the global issues that, to solve some of this.
So, but the thing is, why doesn't India still have a TSMC or a Nvidia or a Intel or a AMD till now?
Yeah. So that's why I told you, right? See, one is, we didn't have good policies and all that, the import-export policies. There were government-related policies, tax-related policies and so forth, because a lot of this manufacturing requires a lot of stability.
Yeah.
Right? So we are kind of a closed, country, right, from an economic standpoint. And then the mid-90s, then they started opening up and all that kind of stuff. And, people were, all these companies you see were actually run by Indians, right? Whether, if you go to Qualcomm, probably half of Qualcomm is Indians, right? You go to Applied Materials, which is a big, the largest semiconductor equipment maker, is all, a lot of Indians as well. But I think India as a country, right, was not suited for, from whether tax rules or, many of these, political.
Has it changed? Because unless this changes, nobody will start a company in India in semiconductors.
So I don't, certainly I think, personally I feel that, we've come a long way in enabling some of this. Still there's a long way to go. But certainly there's a lot of changes that has happened, right? I've now, started my company. I want to do the manufacturing in India. The tax laws need to be a lot more stable, right? You can't change the law every year or retro the law, right? I have some bad experiences in that. But I think, it's changing. Certainly it's changing. And if you look at, the semiconductor market is supposed to double, right? It's about $500 billion right now, right? $500-600 billion is a semiconductor market. It's supposed to double, right? It took about 40 years, so, to get to this level. In the next 10 years, it's going to double, right? So imagine, right? You've got to squeeze this into a 10-year frame. India has to be a bigger player in this. Where will you get the people? Where will you get, the cost advantage?
But I'm not seeing Indian entrepreneurs, many people like you venturing into semiconductor space. Unless until they start their companies in 2025, India will not reap the benefits in 2035.
Yeah. So I think, one of the problems that I see, some of this, especially manufacturing requires capital, right? And we are so, what I call ROI companies, right? Return on investment or return on equity, so even before we start, right, we look at this. Whereas China never looked at that, right? They said, hey, we need to do this and, doesn't matter, we're going to lose money, right? So I think government is now, what we call, viability gap, right? They're funding the viability. Right?
Yeah,
so from a manufacturing standpoint.
I think the mindset, you are right, needs to change. We, rather than saying that, hey, a share market would give me 15% ROI, why should I invest in a semiconductor company which is new, so much risk? People need to put money in innovation.
Exactly, right? I mean, think about, Nvidia and all these guys, right? Nvidia would have gone through at least few times where they could have gone bankrupt.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, Jensen will be the first guy to admit, right? So all that, and, the other thing is, what I've studied is, the US, for example, the affluent people, the wealthy people actually funded this, right? So like Lockheed Martin was funded by the local people where they were, so, people who were in the steel or some other industries, right? They funded some of these things, right? And I think, that needs to happen as well.
Yeah, that has not happened enough. That's why the reason most of Indian venture capital funds are dependent on foreign money, because even the Indian, big family houses, which in the US would, put their money into university endowments, right? They want to do it all themselves. If you see today, if you talk about semiconductor, defense, Reliance and Adani's of India, they want to do it all themselves and capture the market share rather than investing in new entrepreneurs, which I think is strange. Like, nation building would require much more efforts from the top, not just from the government, but from
So far, you're absolutely right. All the initiatives that has gone in the 23, 24 has been government initiatives, right? Private sector needs to step up, right? I mean, there's only so much government can do, right? So I think one is, private sector has to step up. And I believe the, what I call challengers, right? Not really the big companies that, the brand names that we know, but there are a lot of companies which are in the, 500 crores, 1,000 crore kind of, and the youngsters, that families, that kind of, they're willing to put 100 crores, 200 crores, 300 crores, to try something new, right? I see that as, I think a very positive sign.
One thing is that there is announcement of India building a 100,000 crore semiconductor factory. Like, is some work really happening on that?
The first, so like the first batch, I think was 150,000 crores or something has been allocated, right? Between Micron, Tata's, CG Power, and so on, right? So I think that has been, and the work is actually going on.
Okay.
Now, how soon they will come up and all that, I think Tata's will definitely make it happen, right? I think the more important thing is, how do we build products out of this? How do we get Indian companies to benefit out of this? right? We don't want to get into this cycle where we're building again for these, foreign companies to use, the fabs and, and basically subsidized by.
And we don't want to become a semiconductor services nation like IT services nation.
Exactly. You're absolutely right. And that is where, I feel that, we need to step up, right? We need to create our own, Qualcomm or Broadcom, right? IVP is one of them that, we're trying to do that. And there are many more, right? Needs to come. And, government, I think to some extent, right, this DLI and all that is, is helping. States are also, starting to step up. The private sector really, really needs to fund. That's why I say, look, the very easy thing to do is, when government is funding a startup, why don't you piggyback with the fund?
Yeah.
Right? Government is giving free money. We can come in and take equity with these guys, right? So, so I think, that cooperation needs to happen.
And what are some of the US partnerships with India chip industry right now that are starting to happen?
I think, it's very, I don't know how to explain this, but, geopolitically, right, the US is, pretty much trying to align with various countries, right? And in semiconductor, right, there is this very high end and low end, all kind of products, right? The whole spectrum of products required, right? Say, for example, you want to make a solar inverter. US is also pushing for a lot of solar energy and all that, right? A solar inverter doesn't require a state-of-the-art wafer fab.
Yeah.
Right? IVP is, making some products for the solar inverter, for example. Now, that manufacturing is not going to happen in the US. US is not going to make inverters, right? Because one is, their cost will go through, and they don't even have the people to do it, right? So I think, for alternatively, right, they're going to look at countries like India to take that kind of market, right? So I think, from US standpoint, they will want to maintain the lead in technology, but anything mature and all that, they want to come from certain, alignment that they have, right? So I think India has a very good shot at it.
But can India really meet the global semiconductor standards and needs?
Absolutely. Absolutely. See, when I started TESOL, for example, there was a lot of questions, because, you probably will do some low end stuff and all that. I'm very proud to say, TESOL does some of the, the Snapdragon, Qualcomm products.
Design or manufacturing?
No, we do the test development for that. The hardware that we use for testing, the design is done in Coimbatore.
Okay.
Right. And these are like, 50 layer, 60 layer, boards, right? Big boards. It's designed in Coimbatore, right? The test development is done here locally, right? So, all these companies, whether it's Intel or TI and all, they're very dependent on India to do it. So, absolutely, I have no doubt. Now, on the manufacturing, if you want to be like a TSMC, it's probably going to take 20 years.
Why is that?
See, because again, right, design and engineering and all that, we are good. But when it comes to manufacturing, right, we are not very hands-on people.
Why do you say that? The cars are manufactured in India.
So, no, they are, right? So the problem is the IT and software industry has pushed a lot of these bright people to, sit at a desk and, create code, right? And they're very good at it. But I think there needs to be a change in our education system where even from high school onwards, right, people should be trained to enjoy working with their hands, right? Semiconductor requires that, right? If you work in a fab, right, you actually have to work with, chemistry, you have to work with mechanical, all kind of things, right? And we are not, so if you look at Europeans, for example, right, there's a lot more hands-on activity they do, right? They repair their own bikes, they repair their own thing, right? They can fix their own car if they need to, right? Our guys, even changing engine oil, they'll have a problem, right? They don't know where the nut and bolt, right? So I think, that needs to happen in our education system and take a lot of pride in, building products. So I think that will happen. And just culturally, right, there's a lot more precision required, right? But, definitely I feel that, we can do it. There is no question. I am absolutely positive.
So one question is that uh, there's a $15 $15 billion incentive plan for semiconductor India to become a semiconductor hub globally. Is that also happening?
The first batch, I mean, the government actually, gave the money, and the first round, right, last year,
Yeah.
2024. So the second round, I was told that the 2.0 is going to be announced, in the next budget, and there's significant amount of money that is coming. Now they may focus on the ecosystem guys, equipment guys, chip product companies, and so on. May not be as much for the manufacturing.
Which are the Indian companies that you respect in semiconductor space?
Not many come to mind.
But a few. It can't be just IVP in semiconductor.
So I think, L&T Semiconductor is making a good push, right? I'm aware of what they are trying to do. L&T has put $100 million towards that, right?
But L&T is not an Indian company, right? So
no, L&T is an Indian company.
Larsen and Toubro.
Yeah.
The original.
Oh yeah. L&T is an Indian company. After the independence, or even before independence, it became an Indian company. It's a 100% Indian company. They're into construction and all that.
Mostly construction then only.
Yeah. So, but they have, they just about a year ago they announced they put $100 million in creating a chip company.
Okay.
So it's called L&T Semiconductor. And then the other one, I would say CG Power, right? You must have heard of CG Power. They're also very successful, part of the Murugappa group. They're also, trying to, bring up their own chips, right? So there's a good one. Tata bought a chip company called Sankhya Labs. So, they're trying to get into making chips. So I think, they're all small now, but I think, if they put enough, beat behind it to build it up, they'll be successful.
And you have said you won't retire until semiconductor manufacturing in India really happens, right? Now you are at age 68 and this is your second startup. Why is it important for you to make this happen?
I'm a big believer. I'm 69 this year. I'm a big believer that without manufacturing, you can't build a chip company, right? See, why a small country like Taiwan...
Is IVP in manufacturing?
No, IVP, I'm saying it will be a chip company. We're a fabless chip company. Right?
You will just design chips.
We will design chips and we will actually sell our chips in our brand.
Who will manufacture them?
We will outsource the manufacturing. Right? So let's say Tata comes up with the fab, we will outsource to Tata to make the wafer. Maybe CG Power will do the packaging and we'll sell. You see, like Nvidia, right? So Nvidia doesn't have any manufacturing, but they're a chip company.
They outsource all their manufacturing to TSMC.
Everything, 100%. They don't have any manufacturing.
That's why when Nvidia stocks rose, TSMC stocks also rose along.
Goes up, and like Intel comes down because Intel has its own manufacturing.
Okay, why is that? Like why did they come down?
No, because now you have to manage your assets, right? Guys, I told you, right? You got to keep investing in manufacturing to keep up with technology.
Yeah.
So either you're a chip company, without any.
So you're saying you have to decouple both of them.
That seems to be the formula. Right? If you look at Broadcom, Qualcomm, they're all, fabulous chips. They don't have any manufacturing. The guys who have manufacturing are struggling.
Okay.
Right? So manufacturing itself will be an activity by itself and a business by itself. And then you have the, chip companies which will use them. Right? So I believe that, in India, right, if we don't have a, manufacturing capability, we will not be able to cross the, remember I told you, you do design and then when you make the chip, right, the physical chip, there's a lot of learning that happens there. If we don't have it in India, we are dependent on Taiwan or Japan or Korea to make that for us. They have the knowledge, we don't. So that is why even a small country like Taiwan has MediaTek, for example. MediaTek is as good as Qualcomm, right? There's a company called Richtech, which makes analog chips, which is, as good as, some of the big, TI and onsemi. But we have none, right? And I believe that unless you have the manufacturing piece of it, it will be hard for us to scale to become a chip company.
And who are the top 3 companies in India in manufacturing right
So
now?
the ones that are being funded now, right? Tata's,
Yeah.
and then CG Power, and then Keynes.
And by manufacturing, you mean any chip designer can come to them and they'll manufacture chips for them?
Well, yeah. So they're building like Tata is building a wafer fab. So, I will design my chip to be fabbed, in their fab. We'll have some design rules and all that. And they will, fab and give me the wafers. Then I'll get it assembled packaged it in CG Power or something.
What is the assembling? Like, what does
It's
it
what we call, when it comes in a wafer, right? The circuits come in a wafer. But ultimately, you've seen the PC board,
Yeah.
right? You have to mount it on a PC board. So you need to do a packaging where the interconnect happens.
Got it. And the CG Power is the only company that does it?
No, CG, there are many. Tata is also doing it.
Okay.
So they have a fab and they have what we call the
Okay.
OSAT. OSAT has been given to 3 companies, which is CG Power, Tata, and Keynes.
And do you require a government license to do it?
No, there's no licensing, but the government is giving them money.
Okay.
Right, 50% is coming from central government.
How much does it require to build a manufacturing plant for semiconductors?
No, I think fab, they throw numbers in billions, right? Wafer fab.
It requires $1 billion to build a fab manufacturing company?
No. I mean, it's probably the one that Tata is building, they're talking about 4 to 5 billion.
What is the lowest? Like if an entrepreneur tomorrow wants to start a manufacturing company?
Sorry?
If an entrepreneur like you or me tomorrow wants to start a manufacturing company, how much money do they require?
No, I don't think, an entrepreneur will be able to fund a manufacturing company. Right? We can do a startup for chip design and, using those manufacturing, right? That is why government is, giving this money.
Why can't? Like, is it just because of the capital requirement or
Yes.
something else?
No, I mean, let's say I want to start a wafer fab.
Somebody, how much money do you need to raise to start a wafer fab?
So, if the government is giving it, 70%, I have to raise 30%.
Okay.
Right. So let us say it's a $5 billion.
So you think minimum requirement is a $5 billion?
No, I have my own views on this. I think you can start with $500 million all the way to 10 billion if you want, right? But I don't think our country is ready for even $5 billion fab because that's very high end nodes and all. You have to walk before we can run.
Yeah.
So and then also, right, you don't you're not ready to make Nvidia chip. Right, as I said, there's a lot of analog chips and all those kind of things that you can make. $400-500 million you can do, right? So actually, we are telling the government, focus on these kind of smaller manufacturing units.
If you have to put a number to it, what would be the India's semiconductor needs in terms of billions of dollars, and how much of it is met locally, and how much of it is met through imports?
No, today almost 100% semiconductor is imported.
Okay, nothing is
made here. 100%.
And if you have to put a number, how many billion it would be?
I mean, they are throwing a number like our import bill for semiconductor is I think 45 billion or something like that. 45 or 50 billion.
And we have woken up just now to address that.
Yeah. I mean, there's I think a few years ago, right? There was some minister made the comment that our import bill for semiconductor is higher than our import bill for oil.
Yeah.
Right. So we already surpassed that, right? And then it's also very strategic, right, for a large country like India, right? If let's say you're importing from some countries and they decide they don't want to supply to India, we will be stuck.
Yeah, I believe a complex thing like every defense equipment, like an aircraft or a tank, would have thousands of semiconductor chips.
Yes, absolutely.
And even if we manufacture our tanks and aircrafts in India, we would have to depend on a foreign company to give us these semiconductor chips.
Yes. It's a very dangerous thought.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's why, I think, from a strategy standpoint also, right, we need to have our own industry.
And does China own their own end-to-end supply chain in semiconductors?
So they started this about 30 years ago.
Okay.
right? So they have, indigenized a lot of the products.
Which is their largest company in semiconductor space?
They have, a few companies. From a fab standpoint, there's a company called SMIC, SMIC,
Okay.
which is pretty large. They took actually from Taiwan and all
Yeah.
that. And then there is Huawei, right? Huawei. Huawei makes telecom equipment. They have a silicon arm called High Silicon.
When it's so critical to our country, why are we not discussing it enough?
Currently we are, right? And I would say that, we woke up a little bit late, for sure. But I think, it's been addressed in the last 2-3 years. The Prime Minister talks about semiconductor in the United Nations, right? So, so I think, there is enough traction now, visibility.
And are there a lot of dependencies, as you said, to start a semiconductor company like yours, IVP?
Yeah. So, you need a lot of experience of working outside of India, right? When you send the design files, you make it, and then you need to understand go to market. How do you sell into this? How do you, so all that experience is it doesn't exist within India,
Yeah.
right? So we are consumers, so we are not makers, right?
Got it.
So all that the learning has to happen.
No, thank you so much, Raja. This has been a very eye-opening and insightful conversation. I wish to do a part 2 of it sometime soon. But I think this is enough food for thought for our audience to chew upon and realize why semiconductor is so important to our nation.
Thank you. Thank
Thank
you,
you so
Siddharth. I enjoyed the conversation. Thank you.